I didn't say a word when Margaret Thornberry, the HOA president, slammed her manicured fist on the conference table and screamed about property violations and trespassing charges. I just reached into my briefcase, pulled out the original Army Corps of Engineers construction permit dated 1987, and slid it across the polished wood surface. Her lawyer's face went from smug confidence to paper white in about 3 seconds. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd heard in 2 years, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, when all I wanted was a quiet place to heal. I moved to Willowbrook Estates in the spring of 2019, 6 months after my discharge from the Army. 23 years as a combat engineer. It left me with enough stories to last several lifetimes and a desperate need for peace. The house I bought was nothing special, a modest ranch on half an acre at the end of Maple Ridge Drive, backing up to state forest land. What drew me wasn't the house itself, but the location. Dead-end street, mature oak trees, and blessed silence. After decades of diesel generators, construction noise, and the constant hum of military life, craved quiet like a drowning man craves air. The neighborhood seemed perfect for a man trying to decompress. My daily routine was simple and therapeutic. Morning coffee on the back deck, watching deer graze at the forest edge. Afternoons spent fixing up the house, replacing rotted deck boards, painting shutters, small projects that kept my hands busy. While my mind slowly unwound from 2 decades of hypervigilance, evenings were for reading on the porch or tinkering in the garage with woodworking projects. I wasn't trying to make friends or enemies. I just wanted to exist quietly, maybe grow a garden, and figure out what civilian life was supposed to feel. Like, the street itself was perfect for this kind of peaceful retirement. Maple Ridge Drive was a dead-end road about half a mile long, connecting to the main thoroughfare through a well-maintained asphalt surface that curved gently through established trees. The engineering was solid, proper drainage, good sight lines, adequate width for emergency vehicles. I should know. I'd built roads just like it in 3 different countries. There were only 12 houses total, each sitting on generous lots, with plenty of space between neighbors. Most residents were older, established families who kept to themselves, perfect for a man who'd had enough excitement for one lifetime. I wasn't looking for trouble when I started parking my truck in front of my own house. It wasn't blocking anything. Maple Ridge was plenty wide, and as a dead-end street there was virtually no through traffic. My driveway was steep and narrow, carved into a hillside, and after a day of physical work around the property, I'd gotten into the habit of leaving my F-150 at the curb instead of navigating that incline. The truck was properly registered, insured, and parked legally on a public street, or so I thought. The first notice appeared on my windshield on a Tuesday morning in October, tucked under the wiper like a parking ticket. Violation notice, it read in bold red letters. Overnight parking on HOA-controlled roadways is strictly prohibited per Article 7, Section 3 of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association Covenants. Conditions and restrictions. Fine, $150. Continued violations may result in towing at owner's expense. I stood there in my bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, reading this thing twice before the absurdity sank in. HOA-controlled roadways. I'd bought this house specifically because it was on a public street. I checked the county records, reviewed the deed, made sure I wasn't signing up for some petty tyrant's kingdom. The road was maintained by the county, funded by my tax dollars, patrolled by county sheriff's deputies. Since when did a homeowners association control a public street? Oh my. First instinct was to handle this like a reasonable adult. I looked up the HOA contact information and sent a polite email explaining that I believed there had been a misunderstanding. Maple Ridge Drive was clearly a public street maintained by county services, and I was parking legally in front of my own property. I attached photos of the county street signs and requested clarification of exactly which roads, if any, were actually under HOA jurisdiction. The response came 3 days later from Margaret Thornberry, identified as HOA president and architectural review committee chair. Her email was terse and condescending. Mr. Davies, All roads within Willowbrook Estates are subject to HOA oversight as outlined in the CC&Rs you agreed to upon purchase. Public maintenance does not supersede private covenants. Your violation fine stands. Future violations will result in escalating penalties and potential legal action. I read her response twice, then pulled out my closing documents. I'd been meticulous during the home buying process, reading every page, understanding every commitment. The CC and RS I'd signed were standard boilerplate stuff: no obnoxious paint colors, no broken down vehicles, keep your lawn reasonably maintained, nothing about parking restrictions on public streets, nothing about HOA control over county maintained roads, so I tried again. This time I sent a more detailed response, citing specific state statutes about homeowner association authority, explaining the difference between private and public roadways, and again requesting documentation of the HOA's claimed jurisdiction over Maple Ridge Drive. I even offered to meet in person to resolve what I assumed was simply a misunderstanding between neighbors. The reply was swift and hostile. Not only did Margaret dismiss my legal questions, she escalated the conflict. The HOA was now claiming I was argumentative and disruptive to community harmony. The original $150 fine had been doubled to $300 for continued noncompliance, and she informed me that the association's attorney had been instructed to prepare towing authorizations for any future violations. This is when I stopped trying to be diplomatic. 23 years in the Army teaches you to recognize a bully, and Margaret Thornberry was a textbook case. She was counting on me being either ignorant of my rights or too intimidated to fight back. She'd miscalculated on both counts. I spent the next several weeks doing what I had done in the military when facing a complex engineering problem: my gathered data. I started with the county recorder's office, pulling every document related to the development of Willowbrook Estates. I researched state homeowner association law, reading case studies of similar disputes. I contacted the county roads department and got written confirmation that Maple Ridge Drive was indeed a public street funded and maintained by taxpayer money. I even drove to the state archives and dug through the original subdivision development files from the late 1980s. What I found was illuminating. Willowbrook Estates had been developed in 1987 by Morrison Development Group as a small upscale subdivision. The original plans called for private internal streets, but the developer had run into financial difficulties during construction. To secure additional financing, Morrison had deeded the streets to the county in exchange for taking over maintenance responsibilities. This was a common practice. Developers would build roads to county standards, then transfer ownership to reduce their long-term liability. But here's the interesting part. According to the original development agreement, the road construction had been subcontracted to Davies Engineering Solutions, my own company, which I'd run for 3 years before re-enlisting after 9/11s. I had built Maple Ridge Drive with my own hands, using my own equipment, following my own engineering specifications. The road Margaret Thornberry was claiming as HOA property had literally been constructed by me. 2 decades earlier, the irony was delicious, but I needed more than irony to win this fight. I kept digging. The real breakthrough came when I found the final inspection reports from the Army Corps of Engineers. The original development had required federal environmental review because it bordered state forest land. As the prime contractor, my company had worked directly with Corps' engineers to ensure the road construction met all federal standards for projects adjacent to protected wilderness areas. Those inspection reports contained a crucial detail that Margaret Thornberry couldn't have known about. The final construction permit included a clause granting the original contractor me perpetual access rights to the roadway for maintenance and inspection purposes. This was standard language for federally reviewed projects, designed to ensure long-term infrastructure integrity. What it meant in practical terms was that I had contractual rights to the road that superseded any homeowner association claims. But I wasn't done yet. I needed to understand exactly how far Margaret was willing to push this conflict, and I needed documentation of every overreach. So I started parking on the street regularly, making sure my truck was visible from her house. Like clockwork, violation notices appeared. The fines escalated $300, $500, $750. The language became more threatening. She claimed the authority to place liens on my property. She threatened to have me arrested for trespassing. Notice was photographed, filed, and added to my growing case file. The breaking point came on a snowy evening in February. I'd been out of town for a week, visiting my daughter in Colorado, and returned home to find my truck missing from where I'd parked it at the curb. A bright orange sticker on my front door informed me that my vehicle had been towed for chronic parking violations and could be retrieved from Murphy's Towing for $400 plus daily storage fees. I drove to the towing company in my neighbor's borrowed car, furious, but keeping it contained. The owner, a weathered man named Jim Murphy, was apologetic but firm. He'd been hired by the Homeowners Association, had proper authorization, and wasn't about to get in the middle of a neighborhood dispute. I paid the $400, retrieved my truck, and drove home planning my counterattack. That night, spent hours crafting the legal response that would end this nonsense permanently. I compiled every document I'd gathered, every photograph I'd taken, every violation notice Margaret had issued. I prepared a formal legal brief outlining the history of Maple Ridge Drive, my role in its construction, the county's ownership and maintenance responsibilities, and the federal contractor access rights that superseded any homeowner association authority. But more importantly, I researched Margaret Thornberry herself. It turned out our self-appointed neighborhood dictator had some interesting vulnerabilities. Her husband owned a small construction company that had done several projects within the HOA boundaries without proper permits. More significantly, I discovered that Margaret herself had been parking her own vehicles on the street regularly. There were photos on her Facebook page dating back months, showing her car parked in exactly the same manner she was finding me. 4. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the third Thursday of the month. I marked my calendar and prepared my presentation. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in my best suit, carrying a briefcase full of documentation that represented months of methodical preparation. The meeting was held in the Community Center Clubhouse, a modest building that served as the neighborhood's social hub. 6 board members sat around a conference table, with Margaret Thornberry presiding from the head position like she was chairing a corporate merger instead of a glorified neighborhood watch meeting. Margaret called the meeting to order with the self-important ceremony of someone who took herself very seriously. After the usual reports on landscaping budgets and community events, she moved to enforcement matters and fixed me with what she clearly thought was an intimidating stare. "We have ongoing compliance issues with Mr. Davies at 47 Maple Ridge Drive," she announced to the room. Repeated violations of parking restrictions, failure to pay assessed fines totaling $2,100, and general disregard for community standards. The board has authorized legal action to place a lien on his property and pursue additional penalties. This was my moment. I stood slowly, opened my briefcase, and began laying documents across the table with the precision of a surgeon arranging instruments. The original development agreement, the Army Corps of Engineers permits, the county deed record showing public ownership of the street, the contractor access rights documentation, photos of Margaret's own vehicles parked on the same street she claimed I couldn't use. "Mrs. Thornberry," I said quietly, my voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd briefed generals and commanded construction crews in combat zones. "I need to clarify a few facts about Maple Ridge Drive that seem to have been overlooked." I walked the board through the entire history, step by methodical step. How the road had been built in 1987 by my own company under federal oversight, 2 county specifications, how ownership had been deeded to the county upon completion, making it public property funded by taxpayer money, how my federal contractor status granted me specific access rights that no homeowner association could legally override. The room grew quieter with each document I presented. Margaret's confident smirk faded as her lawyer, yes. She'd brought her lawyer to intimidate me, began, frantically flipping through papers and whispering urgent questions in her ear. Furthermore, I continued, pulling out the photos of her own parking violations. It appears that Mrs. Thornberry herself has been routinely parking on this same public street that she claims is restricted, according to her own enforcement standards. She owes the HOA approximately $3,400 in accumulated fines. The lawyer leaned over and whispered something urgent in Margaret's ear. Her face went through several interesting color changes, red, white, then a sickly gray. I could see the exact moment she realized how badly she'd miscalculated. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," the lawyer said quickly, his professional composure cracking slightly. "Perhaps we should table this matter pending further review of the relevant documents." "No," I said firmly, placing the final document on the table, a formal complaint. I'd prepared for filing with the State Attorney General's office regarding HOA abuse of authority. "We're going to resolve this tonight. Mrs. Thornberry has issued illegal fines, authorized illegal towing, and threatened to place fraudulent liens on property she has no authority over. This ends now." I let the silence stretch for a long moment, watching board members exchange nervous glances. Then I delivered the final blow. "I want all fines rescinded, all threats withdrawn, and a written apology for the harassment campaign. In return, I won't pursue legal action for the illegal towing, won't file complaints with the state authorities, and won't seek damages for the time and expense your overreach has cost me. This is a one-time offer that expires when I walk out of this room." Margaret looked like she was going to argue, but her lawyer grabbed her arm and whispered something that made her shoulders sag in defeat. The board voted unanimously to rescind all fines and formally acknowledge that Maple Ridge Drive was outside HOA jurisdiction. I walked out of that meeting feeling lighter than I had in months. The next morning, I found a formal letter of apology in my mailbox, along with a check reimbursing me for the towing fees. More importantly, I never received another violation notice. The aftermath was swift and satisfying. Word of the meeting spread through the neighborhood within days. Margaret Thornberry's reputation as the community enforcer crumbled overnight. Turns out, she'd been bullying other residents with similar tactics, claiming authority she didn't have, issuing illegal fines, threatening people who didn't understand their rights. Once word got out about my successful resistance, other neighbors started pushing back on her overreach. Margaret resigned from the HOA board 2 months later, citing personal reasons. Her replacement was a retired teacher named Bob Martinez, who took a much more collaborative approach to neighborhood governance. The HOA still exists, but it focuses on what it should, maintaining common areas and organizing community events, not harassing homeowners over legal parking on public streets. As for me, I still live at the end of Maple Ridge Drive in my quiet house backing up to the forest. I park my truck on the street whenever I feel like it, and nobody says a word. The neighbors who had been afraid to cross Margaret now wave when they see me. Some have even apologized for not speaking up during her reign of petty tyranny. I learned something important from this whole experience. Bullies rely on intimidation and the assumption that their targets won't fight back. They count on people being too busy, too tired, or too uninformed to challenge their authority. But when you stand up to them with facts, documentation, and calm determination, they fold faster than cheap lawn furniture. Now, when I sit on my back deck in the evenings, watching deer graze at the forest edge, the quiet feels earned in a way it didn't before. It's not just the absence of conflict, it's the peace that comes from standing your ground and winning. And every time I look at the perfectly engineered curve of Maple Ridge Drive, I smile a little, knowing that sometimes the road to justice is one you've built yourself.